Thank you very much, Ray. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to participate here this afternoon in welcoming all of you and to introduce, as Ray said, our very distinguished speaker and presenter, Doug Mills. Well, the New York Times, no less. Washington Bureau, the top photojournalist perhaps in the country. It's a great honor. And he has been covering presidents of the United States since Ronald Reagan. Now, for many of our students who are in the audience this afternoon, this is a president who was president of the United States long before you were born. Says something about the legacy that the man we're introducing and have with us today. As you can imagine, covering every president since President Reagan, he has also, because of that up-front close lens, gotten to know them all personally well. And I'm sure we'll hear those stories this afternoon. He has been at the other end of that lens for all of the great historical events, really, since that Reagan era. I want to mention just a few of those this afternoon. And he's extraordinary because he's not only a political photojournalist, but also covers sports in a first-rate manner. And there are very few, if any, world-class photojournalists today in two mediums or genres, political as well as sports. And he is certainly at the pinnacle of that profession. He has been right there on 9/11. He has covered the hurricanes of Katrina and Sandy. He has also covered 12 Olympic Games and numerous Super Bowls. Really unusual for a Washington journalist to be so versatile in such a lengthy and important career. But I could go on, and I will a bit more about this incredible expertise and legacy. But for us here at UVM, I think one of the most important things is that he's a parent of one of our students. His daughter Ellie is a senior here, and equally important for all of us is the captain of our soccer team, Division I soccer team. So, Doug, with all due respect, I'm not done yet here. With all due respect, I suggest that your daughter's reputation may be preceding yours here today. Well, this is an individual who is a wonderful speaker for our BURAC lecture series, now 10 years in and some 100 guest lectures at our university because of his great passion and unworthy dedication to his profession and the professionalism that he brings with that passion to his real expertise. He started with some modest background, as many of us did. Hobby in middle school, taking up photography. Studied photography formally in high school and at the Arlington Career Center. Went on to Northern Virginia Community College and started as a freelancer at a relatively modest, small-size Virginia newspaper. Well, you may know the history from then. Associated Press, United Press International, in the years I was growing up, the biggest and best in the profession, Doug. And really rose to the elite of his profession, and for 15 years was with AP before joining the Washington Bureau of the New York Times, where he is. So many accomplishments that one could mention, but of course they lead with two Pulitzer Prizes in 1992 and 1999. And also in 2002, he was awarded the Political Photo of the Year Award from the White House News Photographs Association. One of the highest honors, of course, to be recognized by your own professionals, to be the best. And in 2001, speaking of being there in the middle of history, he was one of the very few press on board Air Force One with President Bush when the tragedy of 9/11 unfolded, and he took that ironic, historic photograph of the president when his chief of staff, Andy Carr, was telling the president that the second tower was going down. And then more recently, he covered the campaign of President Barack Obama and his first 100 days as president. A remarkable individual, as I said, covering actually two fields of great interest, politics and sports. I suppose, Doug, there could be a metaphor using those two in the same sentence when one thinks of Washington, D.C. And I want to thank Ray again for coordinating and leading this wonderful effort to bring this most distinguished individual with us today. Truly an opportunity to showcase, I think, here at the university, our real strengths in cross-disciplinarity and our strong commitment to collaboration across disciplines and departments and schools and colleges. And you're going to see that in a minute. We have a panel, as Ray said, who are going to engage our speaker in a conversation after his more formal remarks. And you'll see, and I appreciate very much our distinguished panelists from our campus and from our state to be able to engage all of us in a very, very important topic. So thank you all for coming and participating today in this conversation. And it's a great privilege on behalf of this university to welcome to the podium Doug Mills, award-winning journalist, and the father of one of our students.
Yes, your cell phone. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. President, for having me. Right, you're president. Ray, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate you coming. It's great to see you all, though I can't see you very well now, but that's probably good. But I wanted to first start by really telling you a little bit what my job entails as far as a photographer covering the White House and how the press pool works at the White House. The White House consists of what's called a travel pool. That may sound weird, but it's a pool of 13 journalists who travel anywhere the president goes when he leaves the gates of the White House compound. This rule was invoked and set long before I came to the White House when Ronald Reagan was there. I think it actually started during the Kennedy administration. But anytime the president leaves the White House, this White House travel pool goes with him. I get to fly on Air Force One all over the world. I've probably flown close to 1 million miles on Air Force One, and never get tired of riding on that plane. It's the finest aircraft in the world. I always feel the safest when I'm on it, except on 9/11. But I will start by just trying to show you some pictures of how long ago I was there. Let's see if we can get going here. When I started at the White House, believe it or not, I know you're looking at this and wondering, some of you, what is that? Believe it or not, I brought some of them with me. They're actual cigarettes that were placed on the seat of every plane, or every seat on the Air Force One. When you got on the presidential aircraft, cigarettes were everywhere. And this was during, I'm pretty sure it started early in Reagan, but it ended at the end of Reagan's administration, where Nancy decided to pull the cigarettes off and put jelly beans on. A little more appropriate given, the health reasons. And now it's come all the way to Air Force One M&Ms. And these are given out on every flight. Flight attendants give them out. It's wonderful. The president there's even his signature on the box. They become quite a collector's item and quite a gift to give away. But as you heard, I started with covering President Reagan, and this was a typical photo op in the Oval Office. I believe it or not, that's me with the hair, the second guy in. Back then I actually had hair. And it was at a photo op like this that I met President Reagan kind of personally the first time, had my first interaction with him. And again, I was probably 24 years old. In my hand there is a tie. For some reason, we used to have tie theme weeks, and I had a tie that had a fish on it. It looked like a salmon. And we were standing in a photo op, much like that one, and the president his eye caught my tie, and he walked over, and he said, that looks like it put up a heck of a fight. So I was like, well, sir, yeah, and I looked down, and I was totally embarrassed. I turned completely red. All the attention all of a sudden came on to me, and he started talking about this tie, and he wouldn't let go. And there are people behind him waiting to be photographed with him, waiting for this meeting to start, and he's on and on about this tie. So he said, where did you get it? I told him where I got it. Went on and on. He went back to the photo op. The next day, I had the day off, obviously not having a tie on in that picture. I went out and bought him one, and I brought it into the White House and told one of his staff members, hey, you saw the president talking about this tie. I decided to give him one. He said, well, guess what? You're going to give it to him. And I was like, no, I don't want to give it to him. He said, no, you're going to give it to him. Give us a minute. And lo and behold, they said, come on upstairs. It was the first time I ever walked in the Oval Office without a camera in my hand. And to this day, it's probably the only time I've ever been in there without a camera. And he was sitting behind the desk, and he got up, came over, shook my hands, and talked for 25 minutes. He had the greatest stories about everything. As you know, he was an actor. So he could talk and talk and talk, and he had amazing stories. This was during I get to cover his second re-election when he won, and this was at the convention. Again, you couldn't make a bad picture of this guy either. Every weekend, back in the old days, the president would go to Camp David. 3:30 on Friday afternoon, you could set your watch. President Reagan was going to Camp David for the weekend. He would take Nancy and the dog up, and obviously, I don't know where he got the jacket, but that was a staple of his to wear the red jacket. She liked red also, and this was when they would come back. He spent more time at Camp David than any president has ever spent there. And I think probably because he didn't have children around the White House, didn't have a lot to do around there on the weekend. You're pretty much trapped in that compound behind the gates, and he would go up to Camp David to get away. He would horseback ride. He would shoot and skeet shooting and stuff like that. So he loved getting away. My first foreign trip outside of the country, again, I was pretty young. My first trip out of the country was I got sent on for UPI, United Press International. I went to Geneva to photograph his first meeting with Gorbachev. The Cold War was in place. It was pretty, it was in the news all the time about the Cold War and about the relationship between the US and Russia. And they started a relationship that's so much unlike the relationship that's going on right now between President Obama and Putin. It's totally different. These guys trusted each other. I remember Reagan having that famous line, trust but verify. And I traveled from, I think I went to Geneva, then we came back, we went to Iceland, and then Gorbachev came to the White House. They were signing arms control treaties all the time. Got to see the Pope with the president, and believe it or not, the Pope even had enough of the questions from the reporters when we were there. This picture is not mine, but I only illustrate it because I never got onto the ranch to photograph the president horseback riding. I'll give you the days here. He spent over 400 days at the Western White House. What's the Western White House? That's what they called Santa Barbara. He had a house on the ranch there, and he rode every morning with Nancy, like clockwork, 10 a.m., and we weren't allowed to see it. We stayed down at Santa Barbara. So basically, I covered his second half of his administration. I spent 4 months in Santa Barbara over his second term. He'd go out August 1st, come back on Labor Day. So there are famous stories about him being out there. One time and CBS News rented this, what was a telescope at the time, and put it in the back of a rental truck, drove it up to the opposite mountain, which was 3.5 miles away, and they hooked up a camera to it, and they could see the front door of his house on the ranch. Only on cool days, on cool mornings, the heat waves would start going, and you couldn't see anything because of heat waves. He found out about it, and he said, okay, I'm going to fix them. I'm going to walk out. He asked Nancy, and then he went to the Secret Service and said, hey, what? I know they're looking at me across this mountain. I'm going to walk out tomorrow morning and grab my heart and fall down. And they all looked at him like, no, sir, you cannot do that. You know what will happen? We're on the West Coast, the East Coast, the stock market's going to crash. You have no idea what effect that would have on the country. You cannot play a joke like that. He said, but I hate that they're over there. They're over there. He said, well, just go out a little bit later when it starts to get hot and you can't see with the heat waves. So he started adjusting his time, and then he realized that was probably not a good idea, but he ended up not doing it. But he loved telling us the story about it. He told us a story one day on Air Force One. This picture was taken from at a memorial for the Challenger, when the Challenger exploded. I was in the Vice President's office waiting for a photo op with Vice President Bush at the time, and we were just about to start this photo op, and Bush got up from his chair, walked past us like he was running out, like the White House was on fire, and he ran down to the other end and went into the Oval Office. And we all looked around like, what in the world is going on? And they said, well, we think the Challenger just had an accident. It might have blown up. So we went back into the press room, and obviously then the president was watching it live on television in the Oval Office while we were down the hall. And a few days later, we went down for the memorial. This was, we camped out at the hospital at Bethesda. He went in for a routine checkup, found out he had 2 polyps, didn't know if they were cancerous, didn't know how bad it was going to be. The press camped outside of his hotel, or outside the hospital. I was there for 11 days straight, from sun up to sundown, every day, waiting to find out what was going to happen with the president, how he was, and then lo and behold, one day they said the president's going to come out, and we kept thinking he was going to come downstairs. And we were walking down what we called Colon Canyon, which is what we nicknamed it at that time because it was a long walkway that was really blowing with the wind, and went down, and sure enough, we heard this knock on the glass, and we all looked up, and there he and Nancy were. So that was the first time we had seen him. So it was, at the time, it was a really historical picture, and really was one of those times we realized the president was going to be okay. This was on Air Force One, coming back from New York one time. He would come back and tell stories. This was only the second time I'd ever been up in the residence. They invited me up one time on Christmas Eve. I was the only photographer at the White House covering my shift for the Associated Press, and nobody else was there, and obviously it wasn't like they had children, they weren't building any toys and putting anything under the tree. And I went up and got to see the residence, and it was filled. This was on election night during a congressional race, but I had been up in this, and it was, it was remarkable to be able to be taken up there by President Reagan. Again, he couldn't make it. This was on his final day in office. He was adamant about having us the press in to see him leave the Oval Office on his final day. I think he was really sentimental. He was really emotional. He'd been there 8 years, obviously. We watched him walk down, and this was the last time he made this walk. And he never really came back to the White House after that. And this was his funeral in Washington. They had a funeral that lasted a few days. The lines wrapped around the White House, wrapped around the Capitol when he was lying in state. It was a really emotional time in D.C. And I think he's really the only president who's passed away since then, since I've been there. Going back to that relationship that he and Gorbachev had. Gorbachev came to the rotunda to pay his respects. He stood there longer than any world leader, any family member. It was amazing. He really deeply, and he said afterwards, he deeply regretted, he was just so sad that the president had died. It was just one of those things that really shook him because they had such a unique relationship. This was at his funeral at the cathedral. Then I'll move on to President Bush. So he was vice president, so we got to know him. I knew him as vice president, having covered a few photo ops, would see him around. Comes into the White House, a lot more energy, everything was different. The first day after he was elected, they invited us out to the South Lawn for a photo op. And I remember making the walk from the press room out to make this picture. When Reagan was in the White House, President Reagan and Nancy were there, it smelled like a florist. You couldn't go 20 feet without seeing a huge floral arrangement. and it was just so vibrant with the smell of flowers. When I made this walk, it smelled like I was in a country kitchen. I mean, there were eggs and bacon, you could smell it. It was like, oh my gosh, this place is alive. I mean, the whole place turned around. Then you realize all these grandkids were running around, footballs throwing everywhere. It just had, overnight, the place changed dramatically. So, that guy there in the foreground started, I know, it's a great face, huh? And you know who the guy is in the back, right? That's President Bush. So on Friday afternoon one day, I was sitting down in the press room, and he walks into the briefing room, and I'm sitting there with a bunch of other photographers, and it's Friday afternoon. Looks like he's already played tennis, and he says, hey, does anybody here know how to play horseshoes? I think I'd thrown a horseshoe twice. You know, I played basketball, football, and lots of other sports, baseball. I was like, sure, yeah, I know how to play. And one other guy raised his hand, so he looked at me and said, well, come on, let's go play. So it became a routine. He would invite me down on Friday afternoons. I would go down and play. If I was at the White House, he would come in and say, Mills, you in there? You in there? You want to play? And a lot of people were very envious. I understood that. There was one other photographer that got to play with us a couple times. And, yeah. If anybody's played horseshoes, this is one of my favorite pictures, too, trust me. If anybody's played horseshoes, he's very competitive. He's one of the most competitive people. He threw a ringer, I threw a ringer and landed on top of his. He threw another ringer, and then I landed my second shoe on top of his, and that was his reaction. I thought I was never going to be invited back. I thought, oh, this is it. How could you do this? But as the night went on, it got cold. It started to cool off. He walked out and got a bunch of coats for us. And then all of a sudden, Barbara Bush came down, said, what are you doing for dinner? I said, I don't have any plans for dinner. All right, we're going to set up a grill and make some hot dogs and hamburgers. Will you stay? And I was like, are you kidding? Of course I would. And this horseshoe pit, this is when they invited the press out after a lot of people started wondering about this horseshoe pit. He put in this horseshoe pit right outside the Oval Office. Right on the other side of those, I think Marines, there's a swimming pool. Barbara Bush would swim while I was playing horseshoes with the president. She'd always say, it's a good thing you don't have your camera, because she would always say, don't take my picture in the swimming pool, but she would be over there doing laps. And he had a clay course. It was it's not your normal sand pit, but he was amazing for pictures. He could have cared less about image, unlike Reagan, who got on stage and you knew everything was in place, everything was scripted. This guy would walk out, get down, start to stretch. Loved to play golf. He's the only guy I know who can play golf, a round of 18 under 2 hours, and he would do it at Kennebunkport. He would vacation every August, like Bush would go, or like Reagan would go to Santa Barbara. Bush would go to Kennebunkport. He invited me to go jogging with him there. I went jogging with him a couple times. He was playing golf one day, and at the end of the round, he came down and said, the pool was there waiting at the clubhouse, and he said, so what do you guys do when you're here? I said, no, sir, there's not much to do. You know, we're just sitting in the clubhouse. And he said, well, what would you want to do? He said, well, you can go fishing. There's a little pond. I said, you know what? We need a horseshoe pit out here. And it was like, all right, I'll fund it if you build it. I said, okay. He goes, what do you need? I'll have it here tomorrow. All the supplies were there the next day. While he played golf, we built this horseshoe pit. We started using it, and then while he was playing golf, he would hear the clinging and the banging of the shoes, and after he would play, he would come over and play with us. So he was a fanatic. I mean, he'd play golf, go fishing, he'd jump right out, talk to the press, and then 10 minutes later, he'd get back to the compound, get on his boat, and go fishing. He was amazing for pictures. This is when we went to Japan. As you know, he was ambassador. Anybody know who that is? Queen, very good, yep. It was a huge deal because the microphones, he apparently forgot to pull out, there's a little step down below the podium for shorter people. He forgot to pull that out before she got to the podium, and England, the British tabloids went nuts for that because they couldn't see the Queen. Mandela came. We went to China. As you know, he was ambassador. He took us on this ride. He said, he told us before we were going, we're going to the square, and we were like, they're not going to, even the Secret Service were like, it's going to be tough to stay, to stop in the middle of Red Square there and do this. And we did, or Tiananmen Square, sorry. So then, oh, sorry, you go back to Gorbachev. Again, he and Gorbachev hit it off. Lots of, this was in Malta on a ship. We went there for a summit. Another thing about his image, we went to church with him Palm Sunday. The travel pool leaves the White House. We go to church. He comes out of the church. The limos are all standing there. I'm sitting, that's my seat he's sitting in. He comes over to the door, bangs on it, he opens up, and he goes, "Can I ride back with you guys?" We were like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, hop over, I'm coming." So I sat on the little island and took this, on the console and took this picture of him. And you could see the reporters are stunned, but he didn't care. Going to a photo op, "Oh, I got to go get a phone call." He'd walk right over and start picking up the phone. Loved his dog. He was so much fun to cover. You see that guy in the back behind him. Anybody know who that is? Bush 43, his son. Colin Powell. Another statement. We did a lot of stuff. I mean, he spent, I think I have it written down, I think he spent a couple hundred days up at Kennebunkport. Loved it. Just throwing this in there, one day, again, he comes back from fishing, golfing, jumps on his boat, goes out. I'm sitting in a place having lunch. Up comes his boat. He's in it. And we didn't have really the travel pool then because, once he got on the compound, that was it. But if he got in his boat, everybody would say, "Where's he going? Where's he going?" He shows up here, and people are wanting him to sign autographs. Well, I handed Andy Card, the gentleman on the right, his chief of staff, my brand new Mont Blanc pen that was given to me as an award. And he took it, and Bush held on to it for about a week. And he says, "I'm not giving it back yet. I'm not giving it back. I like it." So it was really fun. He also went to the same hospitals, came out the same window after one. He had something with an irregular heartbeat. So he went into the same hospital and used the same window. They also went to Camp David. Now this is, I don't want to bore you with this, but this night, Bush went to a dinner in Japan. Actually, in fact, he's in that van. At the middle of the dinner, we were having dinner next door. Our waitress comes over and says, "You American press?" And we say, yes, ma'am, we are." "Your president, I think he have a heart attack. He died." And we all jumped up from this restaurant, ran out, left all of our stuff on the table. And this was a picture I made as he was being taken out. But he had some sort of reaction to some pills, a sleeping pill. So we thought he had died. When we got to there, we thought he was dead. It was crazy. They were covering all the vans as we went by, so that was about all we saw. So on his last day, classy as he is, he invites President, who just had defeated him in the election, Clinton, and we'll go back. This picture was the day he defeated him. This is almost 13 years later when he and Clinton gathered up and joined up for relief for the tsunami. So they had a unique relationship, and people always talked about it happened on that day, that Bush would invite him and was so cordial to him after he'd already defeated him when they were running for president. It was, it started their relationship. And then this was a recent picture of Bush when he was at the White House. He came to, and Obama gave him an award. Clinton Gore, I'm losing time here, I should speed up here, right? Clinton Gore, again, once Clinton was elected, you felt a new energy in the White House. Two really young people, lots of energy in Little Rock on election night. Al Gore and Tipper. Unique. The first photo op I ever did at the vice president's residence after he was vice president. I went out there, they said, and I was the only AP photographer going in at the time, and they said, "Give us a few minutes," and I could hear inside all this drumming and banging, music playing. It's like, I feel like I'm in a rock concert. I'm standing right outside the door of the vice president's residence. I hear all these drums, and they finally said, "Okay, you can come in now." Vice president greeted me at the door and said, "The dignitary's coming from Andrews. He's here. He'll be here in just a minute." Tipper's standing over in the foyer with her drum set, and she's playing the drums. I thought, this is going to be a fun time covering these guys. Very young, energetic. He would sneak out when this was taken when he was president-elect from Little Rock and go running. something that drove us all crazy. We were all trying to, make pictures of him. He would sneak out, climb over a back gate at the governor's mansion and take off and go running. Where does he go running? McDonald's. He would run to the McDonald's in Arkansas. It's crazy. He comes to Washington, what's he do? Still runs, starts jogging. He's in a race here right after he got there. I'm not sure about the outfit. Then it started to become chaos around Washington when he would run. Normally when the president leaves, there's a motorcade that goes. This guy wanted to jog outside because he felt cramped. I'm sure you live inside that compound, you get cramped. He wanted to get out and start running around the city. So he would start jogging around the city. As you can see, the Secret Service are all around. The two ladies behind him are not Secret Service, but they were just running on the mall at the time. Gentleman on the left is an agent. There are cars, there are bicycles, there's helicopters flying. And he would do this at the height of rush hour in the morning. Shut down Washington, D.C. So many people were upset about it. It was talked about every night on the radio. He would run and greet people along the mall. And it all stopped one day when we were in front of the Air and Space Museum, and he stopped to greet people just like this. And it was a really cold day. There weren't that many people out, but there were a couple of people on there. And all the Secret Service around, they had bicycles, and you could hear the helicopters and everything. He was talking to this couple, and over on one of the steam grates was a homeless person. And this person was asleep. We couldn't see him. They were inside a huge sleeping bag. And didn't pay any attention to him. Well, as Clinton got over to start shaking hands, the sleeping bag came up, and the face came down like a flash. And the guy probably hadn't showered or shaved in 20 years. He looked like a monster coming out of this thing. And it scared the president. I mean, he was startled. The service was startled. Everybody jumped around, and it was like, everybody, get back, get back. And we thought, that this could be somebody in there who's waiting because they know he jogs by here all the time. So it stopped after that. He didn't do that. He built a track at the White House, and he ran around that, much to his chagrin. Chelsea, we were in Hawaii one time. Yes, that's the president. This picture he was so mad at me for this picture, as you can imagine, because I was on a public beach, he was in a private resort. I went down, we were staying at the next hotel, went over, and I knew that I had right away, as being a journalist or the press, I could stay 20 feet from the shoreline, and that's public property, even in front of a private hotel. So I was taking pictures. The kids, Chelsea didn't mind. And he came out and smiling. He knew I was the only one there. And unfortunately, this isn't my picture, but the biggest floods of Iowa were hitting at the exact same time. And all the front pages the next day used both pictures. They used something like this, and they used him throwing the Frisbee in the ocean. And they were upset because, obviously I was just doing my job. I didn't know that the floods were going on, but every paper put two pictures together saying, here's our president vacationing in Hawaii where Iowa's flooding away. So where do you think he went on the way home? Went back to Iowa to load some sandbags, all for PR. Peace talks was a big part. King Hussein's funeral, flew over for that. One of those last minute calls in the middle of the night. We're going to Jordan. We've got a funeral, it was load up and go. Out in lovely Seattle. Then I would travel with Gore all the time as vice president, even when he ran for president. He was crazy. I mean, he was great with a football. He had a great pass. Find a football, he'd start throwing it on the aircraft while we were flying. But he was so much fun to cover. And everybody's heard those stories, deer in the headlights, that he'd get on behind camera and all of a sudden he'd just go to a different face. I found totally the opposite around him. We struck up a relationship covering his when he was running for president, and came back on the plane one time, and he had and there were a bunch of press, probably 6 of us. He had a huge bowl of hot wings, and he put them down, and he said, I'm going to have some hot wings with you guys. And I said, well, sir, if you can't have hot wings, you don't have a beer. And he goes, all right, let's get some beers. And I said, only if you are. He had a Heineken, and then I found out that was his beer of choice. So we had a bunch of beers, and when it was over, he invited me up just, I don't know why, because we were talking sports and lots of other stuff, invited me up, we chatted. The next trip, I got on board, he came back and said hello and said, hey, I want to talk to you. So we came up and he just started talking. I was telling him about children, you know, how tough it is to travel and have children and stuff like that. He invited me up. He let me sit in the cockpit for taking off and landing on Air Force Two, which was, you know, a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But he was so much fun to travel with. Tough interviews, too. He always picked the tough ones. He could put up a sweat, too. He could get worked up in a crowd. Hillary. When Hillary was First Lady, I did probably more traveling with her in the second term than I did with the president, with President Clinton. She went all over the world. She was phenomenal to travel with. Great. She traveled probably more than any First Lady individually that's been there since I've been there, that's for sure. Chelsea went along on a lot of the trips. This was the other picture that the president, and Chelsea still tells me that her dad was so mad about this picture of her, you know, midriff showing, that he was so upset because it ended up running in what's called 2 pages, double truck in People magazine. And she even joked about it. You know, she said, oh, my dad's so mad about that picture. But they went out, we went to Africa in the Gorgor crater. These were obviously happier times until this woman showed up. Everybody knows, and you younger ones know who Monica Lewinsky is. I'll tell one quick story about Monica Lewinsky. It took over, I mean, you know, 13 months in D.C., in Washington. That's all anybody talked about, certainly in my house, in everybody's house. It was all over the news. Every day you heard about another shoe dropping. We were having, I think, 6 couples over for dinner one night, and my youngest daughter, Raleigh, was at the table. She was probably all of 6 or 7 years old, and she came by and was talking to some of the parents, and she had just eaten and said, so how are you doing, Raleigh? She's great. She goes, just tell me you guys aren't going to talk about Monica Lewinsky. And it was like, oh my gosh, that's all we've been talking about. So we stopped talking about Monica for a long time. But this was during the impeachment trial, which was really, I mean, to see something like this happen in D.C. was, you know, it's unprecedented to see the president impeached and, or, you know, have it voted in the House, eventually acquitted in the Senate. Everybody was called up before. Washington, this was daily seen in D.C. And everybody remembers that. Yep, go ahead, you can say it. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, right? And then they came on the famous line, what's the definition of is, right? Yeah. So this was at the impeachment trial, the vote. It was right there in the Senate. This was the day he was actually, the House voted to impeach him. A really emotional event at the White House. Believe it or not, everybody was stunned, and Gore, obviously, I think that was the beginning of the end of their real tight relationship. This was the day he was acquitted. That other picture was in December. I think this was in February when everything was acquitted, charges were dropped. And I'm over in the left side in that blue. This is a remote camera I put down on the ground and fired it wirelessly. And I'm over underneath that light. You can see I don't have any hair then. And once that happened, what do? You get a dog, right? Yeah. Now we're on to this guy, Bush 43, W. Came on like a storm. Yeah, good old W. Yeah. He was phenomenal. I mean, he came in like a storm, you know, and changed everything. When he got elected, fireworks at the White House. Has never been that since. We've never had fireworks at the White House. Right in Lafayette Park. Sworn in. Huge, you know, there was controversy. You know, it was a tight election. This was on the inaugural night, the balls. He was a lot of fun. He had probably some of the best, between Gore and Bush, he probably had some of the best advanced people there is. They could make a hangar look like a movie set overnight. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, you think that was probably one of the best campaign or best rally pictures you could put a president in, to have an iconic picture like that. There we are, all out in the Rose Garden after a press conference. That's me in the middle. See the blue shirt again? Ah, our buddy. He loved us. Good old Dick Cheney loved us. Yeah. He was something else. This is how you could see a reporter in the Rose Garden or a news conference get under his skin. And, oh, it was just, you wanted to see him just push the podium away and come out into the audience. He would just get so frustrated because he knows he can talk like a sailor, and I'm sure he wanted to at times, but he was, restraint was needed. This would, after coming back from Camp David. This is one of those crazy things. You go out to cover the president coming back from Camp David for the weekend, and he walks up and you see his face is all bruised and looks like a huge rug burn on his face. And what happened was he choked on a pretzel and he fell and skinned up the side of his face underneath his eye. This was during a debate. This is one of the things when I was with the New York Times at this time, and when you're covering the president, we get a lot of hate mail. I used to get hate mail about the fact that I made Bush look too good, and they always said, "Oh, you're a closet Republican working for the New York Times. You're always trying to make him look good," And this was one. I got a ton of hate mail because I made Kerry look bad and made Bush look good, and it was all by luck. So this was probably one of the most historical days, the start of one of the most historical days I've been involved with. This is on 9/11, September 11th. 6 o'clock in the morning, the president is going for a jog. He jogged every morning. This time he jogged, and the travel pool left the hotel where he was, and we went to a golf course, and they had a jogging path around this course, a mile and I think a half. He came around the first time, went by, we thought he was going to stop. He jogged around again. Got done. By this time, the light's up, sun's up. He jogged 3 miles or more. It was a great shape, physical shape. And that day we were going, Washington was all, a Twitter because of Laura Bush was starting her Head Start program back in D.C. She was going to Congress. The president's going to open up this Head Start program. This was the first big day of launching it. It happened to be September 11th. We're in a classroom, just like multiple times you go in with a president into an event like this. He's in there with students. I'm sure you've seen Fahrenheit 9/11 and some of the stories about this event and criticizing, but having been there, I thought it was all overblown. But he's in the classroom reading to kids. We arrived at let me back up a little bit. We left the compound after his jog. He'd showered. We were waiting in the motorcade. We drive up to this elementary school. We ride in what's called Wire 1 or Press 1. I was in what's Wire 1, which is all the wire photographers and wire reporters. And we're the first press van behind the president, which is probably about 10 vehicles behind him. And the gentleman who's sitting in front of me was a White House staffer. His phone rings as we're pulling into the school, and he's on the phone. And we, at that time, didn't have a lot of cell phones. We had pagers, and he gets off the phone and said, "Plane crash?"